Mornings in Riverview Forest Park always began with silence, broken only by birdsong and the rustling of the wind in the treetops. But on this cold October day, the usual tranquility was shattered by a blood-curdling scream. A jogger on his usual morning run noticed something among the trees that did not fit into the landscape. A human hand sticking out from under a hastily thrown pile of fallen leaves. 20 minutes later, the area was cordoned off with police tape. Patrol cars with flashing lights cut through the fog with their blue and red flashes. Forensic scientists in white jumpsuits methodically processed the crime scene, taking photographs, collecting samples, and making notes. Detective Sarah Cobb arrived as the sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon. She got out of an unmarked black sedan, pausing for a moment to assess the situation. 45 years old, chestnut hair pulled back into a tight bun, wrinkles around her attentive green eyes. Everything about her spoke of a person who had seen many dark sides of human nature. She approached the spot where the body lay. The medical examiner bent over it, looked up. "Good morning, Dr. Mills. What do we have?" Sarah asked, pulling on latex gloves. "A man, about 40 years old. Time of death between midnight and 3 in the morning. Cause of death, multiple injuries. Judging by the evidence, he was beaten with something heavy, possibly a metal object. His face is practically unrecognizable." Sarah nodded, peering at what was left of the man. Indeed, his face was disfigured beyond recognition, as if someone had deliberately tried to erase his features. "Any idea who this is?" she asked, noticing a wedding ring on the ring finger of his right hand. A wallet was found in his back pocket. According to his driver's license, he is Michael Reynolds, 38 years old, residing in Maple Hills. Sarah knew the area, an upscale suburb of Cleveland, home to mostly successful business people and their families. "I need all the surveillance camera footage from within a 2-mile radius of here," she said to a young officer standing nearby. "And check the car in the parking lot. Judging by the location, the victim either walked here or drove here." The officer nodded and went to carry out the order. "Someone hated this man very much," Dr. Mills remarked, pointing to the nature of the wounds. "This isn't just murder, it's a display of rage." Sarah silently agreed, taking notes in her notebook. Someone really wanted Michael Reynolds to suffer before he died, and that someone probably wanted him to be difficult to identify. 2 hours later, Sarah was standing in front of a large white colonial-style house. A perfectly manicured lawn, neatly trimmed bushes, a few children's toys forgotten on the porch, the perfect home for the perfect family. Or so it seemed. The door was opened by a middle-aged woman with a pale face and dull blonde hair. The dark circles under her eyes spoke of sleepless nights. "Mrs. Reynolds? I'm Detective Sarah Cobb. May I come in?" The woman nodded silently, stepping aside. The house was quiet, too quiet for a family home. "Have a seat," Elizabeth Reynolds said, pointing to the sofa in the living room. "This is about Michael, isn't it? He didn't come home last night. I called him, but his phone is off." Sarah sat down, watching the woman's reaction closely. "Mrs. Reynolds, I'm very sorry, but your husband's body was found this morning. Preliminary evidence indicates that he was the victim of a homicide. Elizabeth didn't scream or burst into tears. She just froze, like a statue. Only her fingers began to nervously fiddle with the hem of her blouse. "Are you sure it's him?" she asked quietly. "He was identified by his documents and personal belongings. We will need you to formally identify the body, but I must warn you that it will be difficult. His face is badly damaged." Elizabeth's pallor became even more noticeable, but she nodded, accepting the information. "When was the last time you saw your husband?" Sarah asked, taking out her notebook. "Yesterday morning. He left for work as usual, around 8 o'clock. He said he had an important meeting in the evening and that he might be late. Did he often have meetings like that?" "Lately, yes," Elizabeth replied, her voice bitter. "Mrs. Reynolds, I need to ask you some personal questions. What was your relationship with your husband like?" Elizabeth looked out the window as if searching for the answer there. "Complicated. We had problems. Like many couples, Sarah noticed that the woman unconsciously put her hand on her stomach and then quickly removed it, as if she had caught herself doing something. Mrs. Reynolds, I saw your medical records. 3 weeks ago, you were admitted to the hospital with injuries that resulted in a miscarriage. Would you like to tell me about that? Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. It was an accident. I fell down the stairs. The doctor's report indicates that the nature of the injuries is not consistent with a fall. Elizabeth was silent, staring stubbornly out the window. Mrs. Reynolds, did your husband hit you? A long pause, then a barely perceptible nod. That night, we had an argument. He came home late, smelling of perfume. Not mine. I told him I knew about his affairs, that I was going to leave him. Take the baby when it was born. Michael, he always controlled himself, but that time, he pushed me. Hard. I fell and hit my stomach on the edge of the table, and then the pain and bleeding started. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice remained strangely monotone, as if she were telling someone else's story. Did you report him to the police? No. He was remorseful. He promised it would never happen again, that we would start over. And you believed him? I wanted to believe him. We had a family, a home. Plans. Sarah made a note in her notebook. Who else knew about what happened? The doctors, my brother Thomas. He was furious. He wanted to go to Michael and talk to him. I begged him not to. I'll need to talk to your brother. Can you give me his contact information? Elizabeth nodded and dictated a phone number. What can you tell me about your husband's work? Did he have any enemies? Maybe problems in business? Michael was a co-founder of a software development company, together with Robert Kane. They had been partners for 10 years. As far as I know, business was going well. At least that's what Michael said. What about his personal life? You mentioned that you suspected him of cheating. Elizabeth smiled bitterly. It wasn't suspicion. I knew for sure. Strange phone calls, late meetings, the smell of perfume. Once I found a woman's earring in his car. Of course, he denied everything. He said I was paranoid, that after the miscarriage I had become suspicious. Sarah asked a few more questions, writing down the answers. Gradually, a picture emerged of Michael Reynolds' life, a successful businessman, a cruel husband, an unfaithful partner. Do you know who his mistress or mistresses might have been? I suspected one woman, Jessica Lane. She works at their company. Several times I saw them talking at corporate parties. Too close. Too intimate. Sarah nodded, making a note. Mrs. Reynolds, I'll need to ask you a few more questions, but first, where were you last night between midnight and 3 a.m.? Elizabeth flinched as if she had been struck. I was at home, alone. I watched TV, then took a sleeping pill and went to bed. Can anyone confirm that? No. I told you I was alone. Sarah nodded, closing her notebook. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Reynolds. I'm very sorry for your loss, and please don't leave town anytime soon. I may have additional questions. Once in the car, Sarah dialed her partner's number. David, I need information about Reynolds' company. Everything you can find, financial reports, client lists, internal conflicts, and also run a check on a woman named Jessica Lane. She works there too, and the victim's brother, Thomas Greer. We may have our first suspect. That evening, the forensic team completed their examination of the crime scene. Several important pieces of evidence were found: tire tracks on the dirt road leading to the forest park, a cigarette butt with lipstick residue, Michael's car keys, but the car itself was not found nearby. Most importantly, there were drops of blood on the grass a few meters from the body, which, apparently, did not belong to the victim. Sarah stood at the board in the police station, attaching photos and notes. Michael Reynolds was in the center. To his right was a photo of Elizabeth, and to his right was Thomas Greer. To the left was an empty space for Robert Kane and Jessica Lane. "So, what do we have?" she asked David, her partner, aloud. "A successful businessman, a womanizer, violent at home. He recently beat his pregnant wife and she lost the baby. His wife's brother is furious. Possible problems in business, a mistress or mistresses, plenty of motives for murder. A classic situation. Look for who stands to gain," David remarked, looking through the files on the computer. "Does Elizabeth have an alibi?" "No. She says she was home alone. She has a very serious motive." "Too obvious," Sarah shook her head. "And judging by the nature of the wounds, it was the work of a man. A strong man." "Should we check her brother first?" David asked. "Yes, but not only him. Tomorrow morning we're going to Reynolds' company. We'll talk to his partner and employees. We need to find out what kind of person Michael was at work, and find this Jessica Lane." Sarah looked closely at the crime scene photos again. Something about them bothered her. Something she couldn't quite put her finger on, but she felt it intuitively. This murder wasn't a spontaneous act of rage. It was planned, cold-blooded and methodical, and whoever did it may have only just begun their game. The Rainkey Technologies office was located in a modern glass building in downtown Cleveland. Sarah Cobb and David Morris went up to the 15th floor, where Robert Kane, Michael Reynolds' co-founder and partner, was waiting for them. Kane greeted them in a spacious conference room with panoramic windows. He was a tall, fit man in his 40s with chiseled features and attentive gray eyes. He was impeccably dressed in a dark blue three-piece suit. His hands, strong and well-groomed, trembled slightly, betraying his inner tension. "Detectives, I still can't believe Michael is dead," he said, gesturing for them to sit down. "We were partners for 10 years. He was the heart and soul of this company." "Mr. Kane, when was the last time you saw Michael Reynolds?" Sarah asked, taking out her notebook. "The day before yesterday, here at the office. We had a meeting with potential investors. Michael was in his element, charismatic, persuasive. After the meeting, he said he had another meeting in the evening and left around 6. "Did he mention who with?" "No," Robert shook his head. "Michael had become secretive lately." "In what way?" Robert paused for a moment, as if weighing whether to speak. "We had some disagreements about the direction of the company. Michael wanted to take a risk and invest in a new project that I thought was too risky. He started holding meetings without me and making decisions on his own." Sarah made a note. "And on a personal level? Did you know his wife?" "Elizabeth?" "Yes, of course. A lovely woman. Too good for him, to be honest." "Why do you say that?" Robert sighed. "Look, Michael was my partner and friend, but I'm not going to idealize him, especially now. He was, how can I put it, not the most faithful husband. Did you know about his affairs?" "I knew they were happening." Not that he shared the details, but sometimes he would come to work straight from nighttime meetings without stopping at home. Sometimes I would see messages on his phone when he asked me to check something. "Do you know any of these women by name?" Robert shook his head, but Sarah noticed a momentary hesitation. "Mr. Kane, this is important for the investigation. There were rumors about him and Jessica Lane, our marketing manager. But I never saw any direct evidence. We'll need to talk to her." "Is she at work today?" "Yes, she should be in her office." "One more question. Do you know anything about problems in Michael's family? Perhaps incidents of domestic violence?" Robert's face changed, becoming more tense. "I know they had difficulties with Elizabeth. Once, it was a few weeks ago, she called me late at night. She was crying, saying that Michael was furious, that she was afraid for herself and the baby. And what did you do?" "I went to their house. When I arrived, Michael had already left, and Elizabeth was in such a state that I took her to the hospital. Later, I found out that she had lost the baby. Did you report it to the police?" "I wanted to, but Elizabeth begged me not to. She said she could handle it herself, that it was the first and last time. Sarah nodded, taking notes. Mr. Kane, where were you the night before last between midnight and 3 a.m.? At home, asleep. I live alone, so I can't confirm anything. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be back with more questions. Right now, we'd like to talk to Jessica Lane. Jessica was a striking brunette with a striking appearance and confident manner. She greeted the detectives with a professional smile, but her eyes betrayed her anxiety. I'm very sorry about what happened to Michael, she said, sitting down opposite Sarah and David in the interview room. It's a terrible tragedy for the whole company. Miss Lane, what was your relationship with Michael Reynolds? Sarah asked bluntly. Jessica froze for a moment, but quickly regained her composure. Professional. He was my boss. Only professional? We have received information that you were in a close relationship. Who told you that? Jessica's voice betrayed her nervousness. It doesn't matter. We just want to find out the truth. Jessica sighed, leaning back in her chair. Yes, we had an affair. It didn't last long. A few months ago. I ended it when I found out his wife was pregnant. Did you see each other often? Once a week, maybe twice, at a hotel or at my place. When exactly did you end the relationship? 2 months ago. I told him I couldn't be with someone who cheated on his pregnant wife. And how did he react? Not very well. Michael isn't used to rejection. He threatened to fire me. He hinted that he could make it impossible for me to find work in this industry. But you're still working here. Yes, because he changed his mind. He said I was too valuable an employee. But the relationship was tense after that. Did you know about other women in Michael's life? Besides you and his wife? Jessica smiled. Michael wasn't a two-woman man. As far as I know, there were more. Once I saw messages on his phone from someone named Amber and another one named Christine. Are you aware of any details about his family life? Perhaps incidents of violence? There were rumors that a few weeks ago his wife was hospitalized and that Michael was to blame, but I don't know the details. Where were you the night before last, between midnight and 3 in the morning? I had a date with a new guy. We were at the Blue Moon Bar until 1 in the morning, then he walked me home. His name is Brian Taylor. I can give you his number. After talking to Jessica, the detectives looked through Michael's computer and his work documents. Overall, the picture was clear. A successful businessman who led a double life, juggling between his wife and several mistresses. A man with an excessive ego and a penchant for risk. But there was something else. Michael's personal email contained threatening letters from an unknown sender. I know what you're doing. You'll pay for everything. Justice will prevail. These were the themes of the letters. None of them contained any specifics, but the tone became more threatening with each new message. We need to track down where these letters were sent from, said Sarah, copying the data to a flash drive. I'm already on it, replied David. But the server is anonymous. It will take time. After lunch, Sarah Cobb met with Thomas Greer, Elizabeth's brother and the brother-in-law of the murdered man. They sat in a small cafe near Thomas's workshop. He was a professional cabinet maker who specialized in making exclusive furniture. Thomas looked like a man who was used to working with his hands, strong, with calloused palms and a weather-beaten face. His blue eyes, so similar to his sister's, showed wariness. Mr. Greer, thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Sarah began. I understand this is a difficult time for your family. I'm willing to help with the investigation. What do you want to know? What was your relationship with Michael Reynolds? Thomas took a sip of coffee, considering his answer. We weren't friends, if that's what you're asking. I tolerated him for Elizabeth's sake. She was in love with him when they met. He knew how to be charming when he wanted to. And later? Later, I saw his true colors. He was controlling, selfish, cheating on her left and right, but Elizabeth forgave everything, excused everything. Until what happened, happened. Are you talking about the miscarriage? Thomas's face contorted with anger. That bastard hit my pregnant sister. She lost the baby because of him. And you know what's the worst part? She wouldn't let me go to the police. She said she loved him, that he would change. God, how naive. Did you threaten Michael after that incident? I told him that if he ever touched Elizabeth again, I would kill him. Yes, I threatened him, and I don't regret it. Where were you the night before last, between midnight and 3 in the morning? At my workshop. I was working on an urgent order. The surveillance cameras at the shopping center where my workshop is located should confirm this. I left there around 4 in the morning. Did you know about Michael's financial affairs? Perhaps some problems in his business? Elizabeth once mentioned that he was nervous about some deal, that he had invested a lot of money in some risky project. I don't know the details. After talking to Thomas, Sarah returned to the police station, where David was waiting for her with new information. I checked Rainkey's financial reports, he said, laying out the documents. And I found something interesting. Over the past 6 months, Michael Reynolds has transferred nearly $1 million to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Personal money or company money? That's the thing. It looks like it's the company's, but without his partner's knowledge. I found letters from Robert Kane demanding an explanation for the shortfall. Michael replied each time that the money had been invested in a promising project, but he didn't provide any specific details. Interesting. So he not only cheated on his wife, but also deceived his partner, Sarah said thoughtfully. What else? I checked Jessica Lane's alibi. The bartender and her boyfriend confirmed that she was at the Blue Moon Bar until 1 a.m. Brian Taylor claims that he spent the night with her and didn't leave until morning. What about the surveillance cameras at Thomas Greer's workshop? That's where it gets complicated. The cameras show that he arrived at the workshop around 9 in the evening and left at 4 in the morning. But there's a gap in time, from 11:30 to 2:15, when his car was missing from the parking lot. So he had a 2.5-hour window of opportunity, enough time to drive to the forest park, kill Michael, and return. Exactly. And one more thing, about the anonymous letters. We couldn't trace the IP address, but linguistic analysis revealed an interesting detail. The phrases in the letters are very similar to Robert Kane's writing style, especially the characteristic turns of phrase and punctuation. Sarah tapped her pen thoughtfully on the table. Let's summarize. We have Elizabeth, a victim of domestic violence who lost her child. The motive is obvious, but there is no evidence. Thomas is her sister's protector who threatened Michael and has a questionable alibi for the time of the murder. Robert is the betrayed partner, the possible author of the anonymous threats, with no alibi. And Jessica is the rejected lover who was threatened with dismissal, but she seems to have an alibi. 4 suspects, each with their own motive, David nodded. And yet we're missing something, Sarah frowned. There's some detail here that will tie everything together. At that moment, an officer entered the office with a folder in his hands. Detective Cobb, the DNA results from the crime scene are in. The blood we found near the body does not belong to the victim. Whose is it? Sarah asked, opening the folder. A woman's. We ran it through the database, but there are no matches. But there's something else. The lab found a partial fingerprint on one of the rocks near the body, and it belongs to Thomas Greer. Sarah finished for him, looking at the report. Exactly. 100% match. Sarah and David exchanged glances. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture was still incomplete. We need to talk to Elizabeth again, Sarah decided. Maybe she knows more than she's told us. That evening, they were back at the Reynolds' doorstep. Elizabeth looked even more tired than the day before. Someone else was in the house. There were sounds of movement coming from the kitchen. Mrs. Reynolds, we need to ask you a few more questions, Sarah said when they settled in the living room. Of course, Elizabeth replied quietly. I'll answer whatever I can. We discovered that your brother Thomas was at the scene of the crime. His fingerprints were found near the body. Elizabeth turned pale. That's impossible. Thomas couldn't. He would never. Mrs. Reynolds, don't make this more difficult. If you know something, Now is the time to tell us." Elizabeth started to say something, but at that moment, Robert Kane came out of the kitchen with 2 cups of tea in his hands. "Detective Cobb? What a surprise," he said, placing the cups on the table. "I stopped by to check on Elizabeth." Such a tragedy. Sarah looked closely at Robert, then shifted her gaze to Elizabeth. Something about their interaction seemed unnatural, too formal, as if they were playing roles for an audience. "Mr. Kane, you didn't mention that you were close to Mrs. Reynolds." "I've known Elizabeth for many years. Michael and I were partners, our families socialized. And you visit her home often?" "Lately, yes. After that incident, when she lost the baby. I tried to support her when Michael wasn't fulfilling his duties as a husband." Sarah noticed Elizabeth tense slightly at these words. "What exactly do you mean by couldn't handle his responsibilities?" "Michael was a complicated person, a talented businessman, but a terrible husband. He neglected Elizabeth, cheated on her, and then, what happened to the baby? Did you know that he transferred nearly $1 million of the company's money to an offshore account?" Robert flinched, clearly not expecting that question. "I suspected he was hiding something. The numbers didn't add up, but I had no proof. And how did you plan to proceed if you had obtained that evidence?" "Through legal channels, of course. Through the courts, through the board of directors. Didn't you consider more radical methods?" Robert frowned. "What are you implying, Detective?" "Nothing specific, Mr. Kane. Just asking questions." Sarah turned to Elizabeth. "Mrs. Reynolds, did you know about your husband's financial shenanigans?" "No," Elizabeth shook her head. "Michael never discussed company business with me." "What about his affairs?" "I had my suspicions. I saw the signs, but I had no direct evidence. Until that evening, when we had a fight." "And what happened after the fight? After you lost the baby?" Elizabeth lowered her eyes. "Michael apologized. He said he loved me, that he would never. I wanted to believe him, for the sake of our marriage, for the sake of everything we had. And you believed him?" "I tried. But a week later, I found messages on his phone, from Jessica, and from someone named Amber. He wrote them such things, promised to meet them, said that his marriage was a mistake, that he would soon be free." Elizabeth fell silent, holding back tears. "And what did you do when you found those messages?" "Nothing. I just accepted reality. I realized he would never change." "Did you discuss it with anyone? With your brother? With Robert?" "Not with Thomas. He was already on the edge. I was afraid he would do something stupid." "What about Mr. Kane?" Elizabeth glanced quickly at Robert, who nodded slightly. "Yes, I told Robert. He was kind to me. He supported me all this time." Sarah made a note in her notebook, noting the exchange of glances. "Mrs. Reynolds, Mr. Kane, thank you for your cooperation. That's all for today, but I would ask you both to remain available for further questions." Once in the car, David turned to Sarah. "Did you notice? There's something between them." "Yes," Sarah nodded. "The question is, what exactly? Friendly support, or something more? And how long ago did it start? Before Michael's death or after? And how does that connect to Thomas and his fingerprints at the crime scene?" "I don't know," Sarah replied thoughtfully, "but I have a theory. We need to check something else." She took out her phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Jessica. This is Detective Cobb. We need to meet, immediately. I have information that may be of interest to you, and it concerns not only Michael but Robert Kane as well." Sarah Cobb sat at a desk piled high with files on the Michael Reynolds case. 3 days of investigation had yielded new clues and theories, but there was still no definitive answer. She was methodically reviewing photos from the crime scene when the phone rang. "Detective Cobb," she answered, continuing to look at the photos. "Detective, this is James from the crime lab. We found something interesting when we re-examined the crime scene. I think you should take a look." An hour later, Sarah and David were at the lab, where James showed them a bag of physical evidence. This was found in the bushes, about 15 meters from where the body was discovered, he explained, taking out the object. It looks like a special tool for wood carving. There are traces of blood on it that match the victim's blood type. Sarah examined the find carefully. It was a curved metal tool with a wooden handle, pointed at one end and notched on one side. Partial fingerprints were found on the handle, James continued. We compared them with the fingerprints of all the suspects. There is a match with Thomas Greer, Elizabeth's brother, Sarah said thoughtfully. He's a cabinet maker, so this tool could very well have belonged to him. What's more, James added, the nature of some of the wounds on the victim's body matches the shape of this tool. It's highly likely that this is the murder weapon. But that's too obvious, David frowned. Greer is an experienced craftsman. Wouldn't he have disposed of the murder weapon or destroyed the evidence? Unless he wanted to be found, Sarah said slowly, or unless the murder weapon was planted. Sarah asked to examine the tool under a microscope. Look, she said, pointing to the screen. There are traces of blood in the micro cracks on the handle, and it looks like someone tried to wash them off. Very carefully, but not thoroughly enough. Test this blood for DNA, she instructed James, and compare it to Michael Reynolds' samples. While the forensic team worked on the new evidence, Sarah and David returned to the station to review the surveillance footage. They requested all the video from the area around Thomas Greer's workshop from the day before the murder. Look, David said suddenly, pointing to the screen. That's Robert Kane. The video clearly showed Robert Kane driving up to the building where the workshop was located, looking around and going inside. The time on the recording was 4 p.m., the day before the murder. Interesting, Sarah muttered, but he never mentioned that he visited Greer. Maybe they were in cahoots? Or Kane went there for another reason. We need to check if there were other offices or shops in that building. The check revealed that apart from Greer's workshop, the building only housed a building materials warehouse and an empty space that was up for sale. There's no reason for Kane to go there except to meet Greer, David stated. Or to steal a tool from his workshop, Sarah added thoughtfully. At that moment, the phone rang. It was James from the lab again. Detective Cobb, the analysis of the blood from the microcracks confirmed that it belongs to Michael Reynolds. But there's something else. We found traces of sweat under the handle, where the metal part is attached, that don't match either Greer or the victim. Whose are they? We compared them with samples from all the suspects. They match Robert Kane. Sarah and David exchanged glances. The puzzle was starting to come together. Send a patrol to Greer's house, Sarah ordered. Have them detain him for questioning, and another one to Reynolds' house. We need to talk to Elizabeth immediately. In the interrogation room, Thomas Greer sat with his arms crossed over his chest. He looked tired and tense, but not frightened. Mr. Greer, we found the murder weapon, Sarah began, sitting down across from him. A wood carving tool from your workshop, with your fingerprints and Michael Reynolds' blood on it. Thomas flinched, but quickly regained his composure. That's impossible. I didn't kill him. Then explain how your tool ended up at the crime scene, and why the cameras show that you were away from the workshop for more than 2 hours on the night of the murder. Thomas was silent, clearly thinking about what to say. Finally, he took a deep breath. About a week ago, I discovered that several tools were missing from the workshop. I thought I had simply lost them or left them somewhere on a trip. That happens sometimes. And you didn't report the theft? Why? They were my personal tools, not very expensive. I just ordered new ones. What about your absence from the workshop on the night of the murder? I went to see my sister. Elizabeth called me, crying. She said Michael had threatened her again. I went to check if she was okay, but when I arrived, no one was home. I waited about an hour and went back to the workshop. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because I didn't want to get Elizabeth involved. I thought she might have done something. I was protecting her. Sarah watched Thomas's reaction closely. He was speaking sincerely, but clearly not telling her everything. "Mr. Greer, are you acquainted with Robert Kane?" "Of course. He's Michael's partner. I've seen him at family events. He visited your workshop the day before the murder." "Why?" Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Kane? In my workshop? No, that's a mistake. I didn't see him. We have surveillance footage. He definitely entered the building where your workshop is located, so he came when I wasn't there. I often leave to get materials or meet with clients." Sarah made a note in her notebook. "Mr. Greer, are you aware of any relationship between your sister and Robert Kane?" "A personal relationship?" Thomas frowned. "What do you mean? Could they have been dating? Romantically?" "No! That's absurd. Elizabeth would never—" She loved Michael, no matter what. Even after he beat her and she lost the baby? Thomas paused, considering the question. "I don't know. She stopped talking to me about her feelings for Michael after that incident. She became withdrawn." While David continued questioning Thomas, Sarah went to the Reynolds house. Elizabeth greeted her warily. "Mrs. Reynolds, I need to ask you a few questions about Robert Kane," Sarah said when they settled in the living room. "What exactly are you interested in?" Elizabeth's voice sounded tense. "Your relationship with him. Is it romantic?" Elizabeth flinched, clearly not expecting such a direct question. "I don't see how that's relevant to my husband's murder." "It's very relevant, especially if the relationship began before his death." Elizabeth lowered her eyes, fiddling with the sleeve of her sweater. "Robert supported me during a difficult time. After the miscarriage, Michael was absorbed in his work and his other interests. Robert was just there. He listened. He helped. And when did that support turn into something more?" Elizabeth was silent for a long time, then looked up at Sarah. 2 weeks ago. We didn't plan it. It just happened a week before your husband's death." "Yes, but we didn't kill him. I swear, we just wanted him out of my life. Robert suggested, he said he could buy Michael's share of the company, that I would have enough money for a new life after the divorce." "And Michael knew about your relationship?" "No, we were very careful." Sarah took out her phone and showed Elizabeth a photo of the murder weapon. "Do you recognize this tool?" Elizabeth paled, but quickly regained her composure. "It looks like one of Thomas's tools. He has many of them. It was used to murder your husband. Your brother's fingerprints and traces of Robert Kane's DNA were found on it." Elizabeth opened her mouth but didn't say a word. "Mrs. Reynolds, I suggest you tell the whole truth. Right now, or the next conversation will take place at the police station with a lawyer present." Elizabeth broke down. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes showed not only sadness, but also relief. "I'll tell the truth. But not here. At the station. And I want immunity from prosecution for Thomas. He's innocent." At the police station, in the presence of a lawyer, Elizabeth Reynolds began her story. Her voice was quiet but firm. "After I lost the baby, something inside me broke. I realized that Michael would never change, that he would continue to cheat on me, humiliate me, maybe even raise his hand to me again. I wanted to leave, but I was afraid. He threatened that if I filed for divorce, I wouldn't get a penny, that he would destroy me." Sarah nodded, taking notes. "Robert knew about the situation. He always looked at me in a special way, even when Michael and I had just gotten married. But he never crossed the line. Until the day he found me in the hospital after my miscarriage. He was so angry at Michael. And so kind to me. And you started dating?" "Not right away. At first, he just supported me as a friend. But over time, yes, we grew closer. And when I told him that Michael was still cheating on me even after everything that had happened, something in him changed. He became obsessed with protecting me." "And you planned the murder together?" Elizabeth flinched. "Not like that. Not right away. At first, Robert just wanted to buy out Michael's share, force him to leave the company and my life. But then he discovered financial fraud, $1 million transferred offshore. Michael was stealing not only from the company, but also from me. That money was part of my inheritance, which I had invested in their business. And then you decided to kill him? Robert decided. I just didn't stop him. He said he would make Michael pay for everything, that it would look like an accident or a robbery. I didn't know the details. I didn't want to know, but you knew enough. Yes, Elizabeth admitted quietly. I knew he was planning to kill my husband, and I did nothing to stop him. How did your brother get involved? Thomas is not to blame. He didn't know about our plans. Robert stole the tool from his workshop when Thomas was away. He deliberately chose a day when he knew his brother was out visiting a client. Why? Why not use something more anonymous? Because Robert wanted to frame Thomas. He was jealous of our closeness. He said Thomas controlled me too much, that after Michael's death, he would be a hindrance to us. Sarah shook her head, struck by Robert Kane's cold-bloodedness and calculation. What happened on the night of the murder? I called Michael and told him I wanted to talk about our marriage, that I was willing to give him another chance. I suggested we meet in the park, on neutral ground. He agreed. Robert was waiting for him there. And you? I was at home. Alone, just like I told you. But I called Thomas. I wanted to make sure he was at the workshop so he'd have an alibi. I said Michael was threatening me again. I knew he'd come to check on me, and when he didn't find me at home, he'd just go back to the workshop, creating a temporary window in his alibi. Yes, the plan was that the police would suspect Thomas, find the murder weapon, and then discover that he couldn't have done it because he was somewhere else at the critical moment. And then the suspicion would shift to someone else, but not to Robert and me. Quite a complicated plan. Robert? He's very smart, and he thinks everything through in detail. What happened after the murder? Robert came to my place. He was covered in blood. He said it was done, that Michael would never hurt anyone again. I cried, not out of grief, but out of the realization of what we had done, what I had allowed to be done. At that moment, the door to the interrogation room opened and David entered. Robert Kane has been arrested, he said. During a search of his home, clothes with traces of blood were found. And something else interesting, a phone with encrypted messages. Our technicians are already working on decrypting them. A few hours later, the detectives gained access to the correspondence between Robert and Elizabeth. The messages were coded as a discussion of a business project, but in fact contained details of the murder plan. Robert methodically described how to lure Michael to the park, how to use Thomas's tool, how to create the illusion of a robbery. When Sarah was shown these messages, she realized the extent of the betrayal. Elizabeth didn't just know about the plan, she was its co-author. Every detail had been discussed and approved by both of them. The final confrontation took place in the large conference room of the police station. Sarah sat across from Robert and Elizabeth, separated by their lawyers. On the table were photographs, printouts of messages, and expert reports. So, Sarah began, let's dot the I's and cross the T's. You two planned the murder of Michael Reynolds. You, Robert, stole the tool from Thomas Greer's workshop with the intention of framing him. You, Elizabeth, lured your husband to the park under the pretext of talking about reconciliation. And you, Robert, brutally murdered him, deliberately disfiguring his face to make identification difficult. Robert sat with a stony expression on his face, but Elizabeth cried quietly. Why? Sarah asked. Why couldn't you just get a divorce? You don't understand, Robert finally said. Michael wasn't a normal person. He wouldn't have let her go just like that. He was obsessed with control. Even if she had left, he would have stalked her, terrorized her. He had already proven what he was capable of when she lost the baby. And instead of going to the police, you decided to be judge and executioner? The police? Robert smiled bitterly. What would they have done? issued a temporary restraining order? That would have been useless. Meanwhile, Michael would have taken all the company's assets, ruined Elizabeth, and made her life hell. I saw what he was like. I knew he would never stop. He beat me so badly that I lost the baby, Elizabeth said quietly. And then he pretended nothing had happened. He continued to cheat on me, lie to me, manipulate me. I woke up every morning thinking, what if he loses his temper again today? What if I don't survive the next time? Sarah looked closely at both of them. Their eyes showed both guilt and a strange relief, as if a heavy burden had finally been lifted from their shoulders. I understand your motives, she said slowly. But that doesn't justify murder. And it doesn't justify trying to frame an innocent man. Thomas knew nothing, Elizabeth said quickly. I swear to you he's innocent. We already understand that. He will be released. As Roberta and Elizabeth were led away to the holding cells, Sarah remained in the conference room, gathering documents. David sat down next to her. Tough case, he remarked. Yes, Sarah nodded. A victim who was a monster herself. Killers who thought they were vigilantes. Do you think the jury will show leniency to Elizabeth? Perhaps. A history of domestic violence, the loss of a child. Those are mitigating circumstances. But the way they planned it all so coldly, how they tried to frame an innocent man. Sarah fell silent, staring at the photo of Michael Reynolds. A man who had caused so much pain in his lifetime and destroyed several more lives with his death. Sometimes I feel like true justice is unattainable, she said thoughtfully. We can only try to minimize the damage, protect the innocent. But preventing tragedy, that's much more difficult. David nodded silently, and together they left the station, leaving behind a case that reminded everyone that behind every mask could hide both a monster and a victim. And sometimes the same person could be both. Thomas Greer, released from custody, stood in the hallway, lost and devastated. His sister had confessed to being an accomplice to murder. The weapon was his own tool, and the man he hated had ultimately gotten what he perhaps deserved. Mr. Greer, Sarah said to him, I'm sorry you got involved in this case. I can't blame her, he replied quietly. After everything he did to her, I wanted to kill him myself when I saw her in the hospital. Maybe if I had done it then, she wouldn't have ended up in this situation with Kane. It's not your fault. You tried to protect your sister through legal means. They chose a different path. Thomas nodded, and Sarah sensed that behind his outward calm lay a storm of emotions. Guilt, anger, regret. Another victim of this tragedy, albeit indirectly. Stepping outside, Sarah turned up the collar of her coat to protect herself from the cold wind. The sky over Cleveland was gray, promising rain soon. As in this case, behind the outward facade of prosperity lay a storm that eventually broke out, sweeping away lives and destinies. Justice had prevailed, Sarah thought, but at what cost? And was it really justice, or just another illusion of it?